Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. My wife, Molly, was the kind of woman who lit up any room she walked into. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, with a laugh that could break through any silence. We had built a life that others envied, a house, successful careers, friends who loved to be around us. We were the kind of couple people looked at and thought, they've got it all. And for a long time, I thought we did. But sometimes, happiness blinds you. You tell yourself that everything is fine, even as the cracks start to show. It was in the little things at first. Molly's phone would buzz late at night, and she'd glance at it with a hint of a smile before putting it face down on the table. I didn't question it, convinced that it was nothing. She'd laugh it off when I asked her why she seemed distant, brushing her fingers across my shoulder and saying, "Don't worry so much, Billy." But that uneasy feeling stayed with me. I tried to shake it, chalking it up to my imagination or the stress of work. I told myself that after 5 years of marriage, small shifts were normal. People changed, grew, settled. It was probably nothing. Or so I thought. One evening, she came home from one of her frequent work trips, looking especially exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes and moved through the house quietly, as though weighed down by something invisible. That night, she barely looked at me. We went to bed without talking, without the usual goodnight kiss or even a quick touch. She rolled over, her back facing me, and fell asleep almost instantly. The next day, I found her phone on the kitchen counter, left unlocked. It was as if some force had placed it there for me, daring me to look. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to turn away and let things slide like I always had. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me. I picked it up, my heart racing as if I were about to commit some crime, and scrolled through her recent messages. And there it was. A message from a name I didn't recognize. It was short, just a few words, but they might as well have been a punch to the gut. "Can't wait to see you again next weekend." The words blurred as I tried to process them, my mind scrambling to come up with any other explanation. I scrolled up, finding more messages between them, weekend plans, little jokes, "miss you" messages that she'd never sent to me. I stood there, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was there, clear as day. I could feel the heat rising in my face, anger bubbling beneath the surface as I pieced it together. She had been meeting this man during her so-called work trips, sneaking away to be with him while I stayed here, thinking of her, waiting for her to come home. That night, I lay beside her, my mind racing. I could hear her breathing, slow and even, as if she didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and betrayal, but I said nothing. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to be sure. I wanted to know everything before I pulled the rug out from under her. Over the next few days, I went about my routine, acting as if nothing had changed. I waited for her to leave her phone unattended again, hoping to find more clues. In the meantime, I combed through her social media, our shared emails, anything I could find. She was careful, I'll give her that. There were no blatant signs, no obvious slips. But I knew what I'd seen on her phone, and it gnawed at me every day. Then, as luck would have it, I saw her phone light up again while she was in the shower. I knew it was wrong, but the part of me that still loved her wanted answers. The message was from the same number, asking if she was still on for their weekend plans. I scrolled back up, my heart pounding as I read. The messages were full of flirtations, inside jokes, and plans they'd made without me ever knowing. He was her colleague Nick, the one she'd mentioned casually a few times. The thought of her lying to my face, slipping out to be with this man while I trusted her completely, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. For the first time, I understood how people could be driven to revenge. The idea of her slipping away to spend time with him, laughing and whispering to him the way she used to with me, it was too much. But I kept quiet. I didn't confront her, didn't let on that I knew. Instead, I decided to bide my time, to find a way to make her feel even a fraction of the betrayal I felt. The next weekend, I told her I was planning a special anniversary party. She looked surprised, almost reluctant, but I insisted. It would be the perfect opportunity to see her interact with our friends, to observe her as she put on her usual mask of happiness. I invited all our closest friends, even her colleagues. She was on edge, clearly thrown off by the suddenness of my plan, but she agreed. As the night of the party drew closer, I planned each detail meticulously. I wanted her to have no idea what was coming. The only thing I knew for sure was that I needed answers, and this party would be the start. The night of the party arrived, and I was buzzing with nervous energy. I'd rehearsed this scene in my head 100 times, yet standing in front of the mirror adjusting my tie, I felt the weight of everything I knew pressing down on me. This wasn't just about exposing her affair. It was about exposing the lie our marriage had become, and I wasn't sure how I'd handle it once the facade shattered. Molly seemed uneasy, too. She spent more time than usual getting ready, fussing over her dress and makeup, checking her phone with that same subtle anxiety I'd noticed before. It was almost funny how she was trying so hard to look perfect for everyone. The Molly standing in front of me, adjusting her necklace with a shaky smile, wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. But she was also someone I'd never really known until now. Our guests started arriving shortly after 7. Friends from work, a few old college buddies, and Molly's colleagues, including Nick. I watched her carefully when he walked through the door, a little smile flitting across her lips as their eyes met. I had to suppress a grimace when I saw it. The casual ease between them was sickening, yet everyone else seemed oblivious. As the party wore on, I moved through the room, chatting with guests and making small talk, all the while keeping a careful eye on Molly and Nick. They interacted mostly in group settings, laughing with friends, but I could see the way her gaze lingered on him, the small touches, the little signs she thought no one would notice. Finally, it was time for the toast. I clinked my glass and the room quieted as everyone turned to face me. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I started, looking around at the familiar faces. "Tonight's special because it marks another year with Molly, my beautiful, loving wife. When we got married, I promised to always be by her side, to support her, and to trust her. And, well, I have." I could see Molly's face tighten slightly, her smile faltering just enough for me to notice. Nick shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing around as though he'd rather be anywhere else. "But marriage," I continued, holding Molly's gaze, "isn't just about trust. It's about honesty. It's about sharing everything with each other. Isn't that right, Molly?" I smiled, feeling the weight of the room's silence as everyone's eyes fell on her. She cleared her throat, forcing a shaky smile as she nodded, trying to play along. "Of course, Billy." "Good," I said, setting down my glass. "Because I have a question for you, Molly." The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the tension in the room as every eye darted between us. "I want to know, in front of all our friends, why did you feel the need to keep Nick a secret from me?" There was a gasp from someone in the crowd, and I could see Molly's eyes widen, her face turning pale. Nick shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the room like a cornered animal, clearly caught off guard. What do you mean?" she stammered, clutching her glass tightly. "Oh, come on, Molly." I kept my voice calm, barely above a whisper. "Don't make me say it in front of everyone. Why don't you tell our friends about your work trips with Nick? I'm sure they'd love to hear about your weekends away together." Her eyes flashed with panic, and she took a small step back, as if trying to put distance between us. "Billy, this isn't the time." "No. Because I think it's exactly the time," I said, my voice dropping. "How long have you been lying to me, Molly? Was it months? Years? I mean, Nick seems like a decent enough guy, at least he's honest about what he wants, right?" Nick was red-faced, avoiding everyone's gaze, clearly mortified. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Molly took a deep breath, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked around the room, seeing only judgment and shock reflected back at her. "Billy, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Can we talk about this privately?" "Privately?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Why? So you can lie some more? So you can spin it into some story that makes you the victim?" I took a step closer, feeling the frustration, the anger that had been boiling up for weeks finally spill over. "I loved you, Molly. I trusted you. And this is what you did with that trust?" The room was silent, our friends watching the scene unfold in stunned disbelief. No one dared move or speak, every eye fixed on us as the tension thickened. Molly looked around, the reality of her actions finally dawning on her. She turned to Nick, who looked just as shocked as she was. "Nick. He didn't even look at her, his face a mask of shame as he muttered, "I'm sorry, I have to go," and practically bolted for the door, leaving her standing there alone, her betrayal laid bare in front of everyone. For a moment, she looked back at me, her eyes full of regret and something that might have been sorrow. But I didn't let myself feel any pity. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. "You ruined us, Molly," I said softly, feeling the weight of it all finally settle on my shoulders. "You ruined everything." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there as the guests murmured in hushed voices, casting glances at her as though she were a stranger. The days after the party passed in a blur. I packed a bag, left the house, and checked into a hotel across town. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same bed that Molly had shared with me while secretly planning her weekends away with Nick. I needed space to breathe, to think. But mostly, I needed time to make sense of the mess she'd made of our life. Molly's calls started the very next day. She left voice messages that I ignored, text after text begging for a chance to explain, a chance to make things right. But what was there to explain? She had been lying to me, living a life behind my back with another man. How could she make that right? 2 days in, I finally played one of her voicemails, if only to hear how she tried to talk her way out of this. Her voice was weak, trembling with what sounded like genuine regret. "Billy, please. I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, but please, just let me talk to you. We can fix this. I still love you. I still want to be with you." I deleted the message and blocked her number. I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing her voice, her excuses. Love? If she loved me, she wouldn't have been sneaking off with Nick, looking at him the way she used to look at me. No, whatever feelings I had once held for her were buried under the weight of betrayal, crushed by the realization that the woman I thought I knew was nothing more than a stranger wearing my wife's face. The following week, I met with a lawyer. She was quick and efficient, explaining my options as we discussed how to handle the divorce. She asked if I wanted to file on grounds of infidelity. I nodded, knowing there was no other reason I could bear to write down. It was simple, really. Molly had cheated, and I was done. I didn't care about alimony, didn't care about splitting assets. I just wanted to sever the ties and be free of her. When I returned to the house to collect some of my things, I was half hoping she wouldn't be there. But as I opened the door, I found her sitting on the couch, her eyes red-rimmed, a tissue clutched in her hand. She looked up when I walked in, a flash of relief crossing her face as she rose to her feet. "Billy," she took a tentative step toward me, reaching out as if to touch me. I took a step back, keeping my distance. "Don't," I said firmly. "Just don't." Her face fell, and she dropped her hand, looking down at the floor. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she murmured. "But I just want you to know. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. What you did, sneaking off with him, lying to me about where you were, that's not a mistake, Molly. That's a choice. You chose this. She flinched, tears slipping down her cheeks as she nodded. You're right. I did. But it wasn't because I didn't love you, Billy. I was just lost. I got caught up in something, and I didn't know how to stop. You didn't know how to stop. I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. How about you never start? How about you remember the vows we made? This was never supposed to happen, Molly. Not to us. She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I know, she whispered, her voice choked. I know. But I was scared, Billy. I was scared that we were drifting apart, that maybe you didn't love me the same way anymore. And Nick, he made me feel alive. He made me feel seen. So it's my fault now? I said, the anger returning. Is that what you're saying? No. She looked up, her eyes wide with desperation. No, that's not what I mean. I know this is on me. I wish you'd let me try to make it right. I stared at her, wondering how she could possibly believe that we could ever go back to what we had before. But there was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that almost wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. That maybe, she really did love me. But I knew better. I turned away, refusing to let her see the hint of weakness in my eyes. It's too late, Molly, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm filing for divorce. She broke down then, sobbing, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. But I didn't comfort her, didn't reach out to hold her the way I once might have. She had made her choice, and I was making mine. As I left, I could hear her cries echoing through the house, but I kept walking, determined to put as much distance between us as possible. The days that followed were a blur. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, threw myself into work, and tried to block out any thoughts of her. But the pain lingered, creeping up in quiet moments, in the small hours of the night when I lay awake, wondering what might have been if she had just been honest, if she had just loved me the way I thought she did. Then, one night, a month after I left her, she showed up at my door. I was just settling down with a drink, trying to unwind after a long day, when I heard a knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking lost, her face pale and drawn. Billy, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Please, just hear me out. I know I don't deserve it, but please. I wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her to leave and never come back. But the look in her eyes stopped me. She looked so broken, so desperate, that I hesitated, caught between the anger that still simmered in my chest and the faint remnants of the love I'd once felt for her. Fine, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Say what you need to say. She walked inside, clutching her purse tightly as she looked around, her eyes lingering on the bare walls, the simple furniture. I know you hate me, she began, her voice trembling. And I deserve that. But I just need you to know, I'm going to counseling. I'm working on myself. I want to be better, Billy. I want to be the person you thought I was. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms as I watched her. And why should I care? I asked coldly. You made your choice. You chose him over me. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. No. I didn't choose him. I chose an escape. I was stupid, and I was selfish, and I know that. But Billy, I love you. I always have. Don't, I warned, my voice hardening. Don't say that. You don't get to use that word with me. Not anymore. She took a step closer, reaching out as though she wanted to touch me, but she hesitated, dropping her hand back to her side. I know I can't undo what I've done. But if there's even the slightest chance that you can forgive me, that we can try again, I'll do anything, Billy. Anything. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give in and let her back into my life. But I knew, deep down, that some things couldn't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever truly heal. After a long, painful silence, I finally spoke. "I think it's best if you leave, Molly." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, turning to leave without another word. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter was finally closing, and I could feel myself starting to breathe again, free of the weight of her betrayal. The months following Molly's last visit felt like a long, slow process of rebirth. I'd filed the divorce papers, and things were moving steadily forward. My life was settling into a new routine. I went to work, went for runs after the day was done, met with friends, and for the first time, started to feel like I was living for myself. There was a surprising lightness to it, a relief in no longer carrying the weight of that old betrayal. One evening, I was at my apartment, finishing up some emails when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I thought it was spam and ignored it, but the same number called again 5 minutes later. Reluctantly, I picked up, bracing myself for a telemarketer. "Hello? Billy?" The voice on the other end was familiar, too familiar. I felt a jolt. "Molly?" "Yes," she replied, her voice a mix of nerves and hope. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but there's something you need to know. I didn't want to leave things unsaid, even if you're done with me." "Say what you have to say, Molly," I replied, my voice hard and steady. "Billy, I'm pregnant." The words hung between us, heavy and thick. For a moment, I couldn't process it. The idea of Molly being pregnant was strange enough, but the timing of it, right as we were finalizing our divorce, felt like some kind of sick twist of fate. "And let me guess," I said bitterly. "You want me to believe it's mine?" Her voice cracked. "It is yours, Billy. It happened right before everything fell apart. You have to believe me." I was silent, unsure of what to say, my mind spinning. If it was true, if there really was a child, my child, how could I just walk away? "Look," she continued, her voice trembling, "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know you'll never trust me again. But this child is ours, Billy, and I want you to be a part of its life. Do you really expect me to believe that?" I asked, my voice full of anger. "After everything?" She didn't respond immediately. I could hear her breathing on the other end, slow and steady. "I know you don't trust me. I know I've destroyed that. But I wouldn't lie about this. Not about something like this." A strange sensation washed over me, a flicker of something, a faint hope. If there really was a child, then maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all of this. But the hurt was still fresh, the wounds raw. Could I even think of having a future with Molly in the picture? I swallowed, forcing myself to speak. "Then we'll get a paternity test, Molly. If it's true, then we'll figure it out. But I need proof. You owe me that much." She agreed, sounding almost relieved, and we set a date for the test. In the days that followed, I prepared myself for both outcomes. Part of me was convinced it was just another manipulation, her last attempt to hold on to me. But another part of me, a quiet, hopeful part, wanted it to be true. A week later, I was at the clinic, waiting in a sterile, white room for the results. Molly sat beside me, her face pale and anxious. We hadn't spoken much since that call, but sitting there together, I felt a strange sense of familiarity, of a bond that neither of us could deny, despite everything. The doctor finally walked in, holding a manila folder. He looked from Molly to me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison," he said, nodding politely. "We've completed the test." I clenched my fists, my heart racing as he opened the folder and scanned the results. Finally, he looked up, meeting my eyes. "Congratulations, Mr. Harrison," he said with a small smile. "You're going to be a father." The words hit me like a wave, and I felt something shift inside me, something that I hadn't felt in a long time, a surge of hope, of purpose. I looked over at Molly, seeing the relief in her eyes, the tears that she tried to blink away. For a moment, we sat in silence, letting the reality of it sink in. Despite the pain, despite everything that had happened, there was something bigger than both of us now, something that connected us in a way that couldn't be broken. When we left the clinic, Molly turned to me, her expression tentative. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," she said quietly. "But I would like us to try and make this work, for our child's sake. I'm going to counseling, I'm working on myself, and I want to be the kind of mother, the kind of person, who deserves a family with you." I looked at her, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Part of me wanted to turn away, to keep my distance and protect myself from any more pain. But there was another part, a part one couldn't ignore, that wanted to try, to see if maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something new from the ashes. "We'll take it one day at a time," I finally said, my voice steady. "For our child's sake." She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something that I thought I'd lost, a sense of hope, of possibility. As we walked out of the clinic together, side by side, I knew that things would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing.